No man dared to marry the 400-pound woman, until the most feared mountain man thundered into town and said, "Her body drives me wild." The church bell tolls. Dust swirls in the street. Whispers rise as every head turns. A woman long mocked for her size lowers her eyes in shame, until a scarred loner, a man with a reputation for violence, silences the crowd with just one sentence. But behind his bold words lies a hidden debt and a dangerous truth. A railroad hungry for land has already set its sights on her ranch. Deputies with forged papers rattle their jail keys, ready to drag the mountain man away. And the whole town asks, is this love or a trap? Lantern light flickers on her face as she clutches a deed that could change everything. The boy she's raising begs her not to give up, and the man who once lived by the gun now swears to stand by her side. Yet when betrayal strikes and the law itself turns against them, will her courage be enough to save him, the land, and herself? Or will the woman no man dared to marry lose everything, just as love finally found her? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The summer sun cast long shadows through the windows of Silver Crossing's modest church, the morning light dancing across weathered wooden pews. Evelyn Mayfield sat quietly in her usual spot near the back, where the wide bench had been reinforced just for her. Her nephew William's small hand rested in hers as the congregation swayed to the gentle rhythm of Amazing Grace. The boy's clear voice rose sweet and pure alongside hers, though Evelyn sang softly, trying not to draw attention. She'd learned long ago to make herself as small as possible, despite her size. The irony of that thought brought a familiar ache to her heart. As the final notes of the hymn faded, Reverend Matthews raised his hands in benediction. "Go forth in peace and love, my brothers and sisters." The congregation began to file out into the churchyard, their Sunday best rustling with movement. Evelyn waited, as she always did, until most had left. It was easier that way. Fewer sideways glances, fewer whispers behind raised hands. "Come along, William," she said softly, gathering her Bible and shawl. The boy hopped up, his dark hair tousled despite her best efforts with the comb that morning. They stepped out into the bright morning, the dry prairie wind carrying the scent of sage and dust. Evelyn had hoped to make it to their wagon without incident, but fate had other plans. "Well, if it ain't the widow Mayfield," came a drawling voice. Tom Hawkins stood with several other men near the hitching post, his weather-beaten face twisted in a mean smile. "Taking up as much space as ever, I see." William's small fingers tightened around Evelyn's hand. She tried to keep walking, head held high like her father had taught her, but Hawkins wasn't finished. "Say, boys," he called louder, ensuring others would hear. "What? Do you reckon the odds are of our dear widow finding herself another husband?" Raucous laughter erupted from the group. "Might as well try to move a mountain," someone shouted. "Better chance of seeing it snow in August," added another. Each barb struck true, though Evelyn fought to keep her face neutral. She'd endured worse over the years, but somehow the cruelty cut deeper coming right after worship, when hearts should have been softened by God's word. William tugged at her hand, his young face flushed with anger. "Don't listen to them, Aunt Evelyn. They're just mean old coots." Before she could quiet him, Hawkins caught the boy's words. "Watch your mouth, boy. Ain't our fault your aunt needs her own zip code." More laughter, harder now. Evelyn felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The laughter died suddenly, replaced by an uneasy silence that spread through the churchyard like a wave. Boot heels crunched on gravel, steady and deliberate. Evelyn didn't need to turn to know who approached. The reaction of the crowd told her everything. Boone Thatcher's presence commanded attention, as it always did. The mountain man cut an imposing figure, his broad shoulders filling out his worn buckskin jacket, a week's worth of dark beard shadowing his jaw. The scar that ran from his left temple to his chin seemed more pronounced in the harsh morning light. He stopped a few paces from Hawkins's group, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. When he spoke, his voice was low, but carried clearly across the now silent churchyard. "Her body drives me wild." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Evelyn's face blazed with heat, her heart hammering against her ribs. Surely she'd misheard. But Boone wasn't finished. His eyes, hard as stone, swept across the gathered faces. "And I'll shoot the man who says otherwise." Someone gasped. Mrs. Peterson dropped her hymnal. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Hawkins had gone pale, his earlier bravado evaporating under Boone's steady gaze. Everyone in Silver Crossing knew Boone Thatcher's reputation, the violence in his past, the weight his word carried. When he made a threat, it wasn't idle. William's grip on Evelyn's hand had gone slack with shock. She wanted to run, to hide, to sink into the earth itself. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant call of a meadowlark. Boone's eyes finally found hers. Something flickered in their depths, something that might have been tenderness, though surely that was impossible. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed oddly gentle coming from such a fearsome man. Without another word, he turned and strode away, his long legs carrying him quickly toward his horse. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone. The sound of hoofbeats faded as he rode out of town, leaving behind a churchyard full of stunned faces and furiously whispered conversations. Evelyn stood rooted to the spot, her mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Had Boone Thatcher, the man mothers warned their daughters about, the man who lived wild in the mountains and was said to be more beast than human, just defended her honor? And in such a shocking way. "Aunt Evelyn?" William's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you all right?" She managed a small nod, though all right was far from what she felt. Humiliation warred with a strange sort of wonder in her chest. No man had ever spoken of her that way, as something desirable rather than deplorable. "We should go home," she said softly, tugging gently on William's hand. They made their way to their wagon, the whispers following them like autumn leaves in the wind. Mrs. Peterson hurried over as Evelyn helped William up onto the seat. "Did you know?" she asked, her eyes wide with scandal and curiosity. "About Mr. Thatcher's feelings?" "No," Evelyn replied honestly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I didn't know anything about it." She climbed carefully onto the wagon seat, grateful for the strong construction that could bear her weight. Taking up the reins, she clucked to their old mare, eager to escape the stares and whispers. As they rolled out of town, William looked up at her. "That was something, wasn't it? The way Mr. Thatcher stood up to those men?" "It certainly was something," Evelyn agreed, though what exactly it was, she couldn't say. Her heart was still pounding, her cheeks still burning with a mixture of shame and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as they made their way home across the sun-baked prairie. Evelyn's thoughts whirled like cottonwood seeds in the wind. Boone Thatcher's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his eyes meeting hers, that hint of softness she'd glimpsed beneath his fierce exterior. But she wasn't a fool. Men like Boone Thatcher didn't court women like her. Whatever his reasons for defending her, they couldn't be what they seemed. Perhaps he'd simply grown tired of Hawkins's cruelty, or maybe he'd had too much whiskey the night before. Yet, there had been something in his voice. Something in the way he'd looked at her. William's clear voice broke into her thoughts. "I like Mr. Thatcher. He's not mean like the others." Evelyn squeezed his small hand, grateful for his innocent heart that could see past reputation and appearance to find good in others. If only the world were as kind as her nephew's view of it. They rode on toward home, leaving Silver Crossing and its gossip behind. But Evelyn knew the talk wouldn't stop. If anything, it would grow wilder with each telling. By supper time, every soul in the territory would know how Boone Thatcher had declared his desire for the widow Mayfield in the churchyard on a Sunday morning. The thought made her stomach flutter with an emotion she hadn't felt in years. It was terrifying. It was thrilling. It was impossible. And yet, as they crested the rise that would take them home, Evelyn found herself looking toward the distant mountains where Boone made his home, wondering what tomorrow might bring. The ranch kitchen glowed warm in the fading light of day. Evelyn moved carefully between the wood-burning stove and the heavy oak table, setting out bowls of steaming bean soup and fresh-baked cornbread. The familiar routine helped steady her nerves, still jangled from the morning's events at church. William sat at his usual place, feet swinging beneath his chair, unable to contain his excitement. The way Mr. Thatcher just walked right up to them, Aunt Evelyn, like in one of those dime store novels. He grabbed a piece of cornbread, crumbs scattering. And when he said, "William," Evelyn's tone was gentle but firm as she lowered herself into her reinforced chair. "That's enough about this morning. Eat your supper before it gets cold." "But weren't you surprised?" "I mean the look on old Hawkins's face. William." This time her voice held a note of warning that made the boy duck his head. "Yes, ma'am." He picked up his spoon, but couldn't help adding, "I still think it was brave of him." Evelyn sighed, stirring her soup without really seeing it. Brave wasn't the word she'd choose. Reckless, maybe. Shocking. Unsettling. She'd spent the whole day trying to make sense of Boone Thatcher's outburst, and failed at every turn. The grandfather clock in the parlor struck 8 just as they finished their meal. "Time for bed, young man," Evelyn said, grateful for the distraction of their nightly routine. William helped clear the table without complaint, though his mind was clearly still on the morning's excitement. As she tucked him into bed, he asked sleepily, "Do you think Mr. Thatcher meant what he said? About shooting anyone who spoke against you?" Evelyn smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "That's not something for you to worry about. Now say your prayers." She waited until his breathing evened out into sleep before making her way back downstairs. The kitchen needed tidying, and work was the best medicine for a troubled mind. The knock came just as she was drying the last dish. 3 solid raps that made her freeze, cloth still in hand. She knew, somehow, who stood on her porch, though she'd never received a visit from him before. For a long moment, she considered not answering. But that would be cowardly. And whatever else Evelyn Mayfield might be, she was no coward. Setting down the dishcloth, she smoothed her apron and walked to the door. Boone Thatcher stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking somehow larger than she remembered from that morning. The lantern light caught the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, softened the harsh line of his scar. "Evening, Ms. Mayfield." His voice was low, respectful. "Hope I'm not disturbing you too late. It's rather unusual to call at this hour, Mr. Thatcher." He nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. "Reckoned we needed to talk, and better sooner than later. May I come in?" Propriety warred with practicality. Having him inside would cause talk if anyone knew, but standing on the porch might draw attention from the hands in the bunkhouse. After a moment's hesitation, she stepped back, opening the door wider. Boone ducked his head to enter, his presence filling the modest kitchen. He stood awkwardly, hat turning slowly in his large hands until she gestured to a chair. It creaked under his weight as he sat. "I owe you an explanation," he said without preamble. "About this morning." "You owe me nothing, Mr. Thatcher. Though I admit I don't understand why you did what you did." His eyes found the portrait hanging above the mantel, her father painted in his prime, kind eyes gazing out from beneath bushy brows. "That's where you're wrong, ma'am. I owe you plenty. Or rather, I owed your father." Evelyn's breath caught. "My father?" 6 years ago. Bad winter storm caught me in the high country. Your father found me half frozen in a line shack, brought me here, nursed me back to health. His fingers traced the brim of his hat. Saved my life. plain and simple. The memory surfaced slowly. That bitter February, her father disappearing into the storm and returning 2 days later with a half-dead stranger. She'd helped tend him, though he'd been barely conscious most of that week. That was you? He nodded. Never got the chance to repay him proper before he passed. Been watching over this place since then, best I could without drawing attention, making sure no trouble came your way. And this morning? Was that your idea of watching over us? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, ma'am. That was something else entirely. He set his hat aside, met her eyes squarely. What I said this morning, it wasn't about debt or duty. Wasn't about pity neither, before you think it. Evelyn's hands twisted in her apron. Then what was it about, Mr. Thatcher? Truth. The word fell between them like a stone in still water. Maybe not spoken as proper as it should have been, but truth all the same. I've watched you these past years, seen how you've kept this place running, raised that boy right, seen your strength, your dignity, your beauty. She flinched at the last word, but he pressed on. I ain't a man of fancy words, Ms. Mayfield, but I know what I want, and I want to court you proper, if you'll allow it. The kitchen seemed suddenly too small, too warm. Evelyn's heart thundered in her chest. Court me? Mr. Thatcher, surely you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know what people say about me. Know about my past, the violence in it. Won't pretend I'm a gentle man. But I can promise you this. I'd treat you right. Protect you and the boy. Be faithful till my dying day. Evelyn stood abruptly, needing space to think. The portrait of her father seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. This is overwhelming, Mr. Thatcher. I can't possibly answer now. Not asking for an answer tonight. He rose too, careful to keep his distance. Just asking permission to try, to prove my intentions are honorable. She turned back to him, studying his face in the lamplight. The scar, the hard lines of his jaw, the surprising gentleness in his eyes. What exactly are you proposing? Let me walk your property with you tomorrow morning. Show me the boundaries, the water rights, whatever needs attention. We can talk, get to know each other proper-like. He picked up his hat. No pressure, no promises. Just a chance. Evelyn thought of the morning ahead, of William's chores, of the ranch hands who would surely notice. But she thought too of her father's teachings about giving people a fair chance, about looking past surfaces to the heart beneath. Tomorrow morning then, she said finally, after William tends to the chickens. Relief softened Boone's features. Much obliged, ma'am. I'll be here at first light. He moved to the door, then paused. Your father was a good man, Ms. Mayfield. He saw worth in people others might overlook. Reckon that's something you inherited from him. Then he was gone, boot steps fading into the night. Evelyn stood for a long time looking at her father's portrait, remembering his patience, his wisdom, his uncanny ability to see into people's heart. Oh, Papa, she whispered. What am I to make of this? The portrait offered no answers, but as she lit the lamp to carry upstairs, she found herself speaking the words of her nightly prayer with special fervor. Lord, grant me strength for whatever comes, and please, please grant me clarity. Sleep was slow in coming that night. She lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of her home, William's soft breathing from the next room, the settling of old timbers, the distant howl of a coyote. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. For now, she could only wait and pray and wonder. The gray light of dawn found her already dressed and in the kitchen, brewing coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. Through the window, she watched William make his way to the chicken coop, his small figure wrapped against the morning chill. The sky promised rain, or perhaps snow. It was that sort of sharp, uncertain morning that could go either way. Rather like her own heart, she thought, measuring coffee into the pot with extra care. Would Boone Thatcher really come? And if he did, what then? Only time would tell. For now, there was coffee to brew and a morning to face, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The morning air bit sharp and cold as Evelyn moved through her familiar routine. She fed the horses first, their warm breath making clouds in the frozen air. The familiar work steadied her nerves, though her mind kept drifting to Boone's impending visit. William darted between the barn and chicken coop, his small boots crunching in the frost. "Aunt Evelyn!" The hens laid 8 eggs today. He held up his basket proudly. "That's fine work, William." She smiled, grateful for his brightness on this uncertain morning. "Put them in the kitchen and wash up. Mr. Thatcher will be here soon." As if summoned by his name, a figure appeared on the road leading to their ranch. Boone Thatcher walked beside a loaded pack mule, his broad shoulders squared against the morning chill. He'd traded yesterday's church clothes for well-worn buckskins and a heavy coat. William spotted him too, and practically bounced with excitement. "Can I come along when you show him the ranch?" "Please?" Evelyn hesitated. Having William along would provide proper chaperoning, but she worried about encouraging the boy's obvious admiration for the mountain man. Before she could decide, Boone reached the yard. "Morning, Ms. Mayfield." He touched the brim of his hat. "Young William." William beamed at being addressed directly. "Morning, Mr. Thatcher. Are you really going to walk the whole ranch with us?" "If your aunt permits it," Boone replied, looking to Evelyn for approval. She nodded slowly. "William knows every inch of this land as well as I do. He can come along." They set out across the frost-covered pastures, their breath making clouds in the cold air. Boone led his mule, which carried his rifle, and what looked like hunting gear. William trotted alongside, peppering him with questions about mountain life that Boone answered with surprising patience. The morning sun cast long shadows as they walked the property lines. Evelyn found herself pointing out improvements she'd made since her father's passing. New fence posts here, cleared brush there, the irrigation ditch she'd extended to the lower field. "Fine work," Boone commented, running a hand along a particularly sturdy section of split rail fence. Not many ranches kept up this well, even with a full crew of hands. The praise warmed her more than it should have. "Papa taught me that good fencing makes good neighbors. We maintain everything ourselves. William helps me check every post each spring." "That's so?" Boone glanced at the boy with clear approval. "Sounds like you're learning to be a proper rancher, young man." William straightened with pride. "Aunt Evelyn says I'll run this place myself someday." They reached the creek that marked their eastern boundary, its surface glazed with ice. Bare cottonwoods stood sentinel along its banks, their branches etched against the pale winter sky. As they walked, Boone suddenly stopped, kneeling to examine something in the snow. "Come here, William. Want to show you something." He beckoned the boy closer. "See these tracks? What do you reckon made them?" William crouched beside him, studying the delicate impressions. A bird?" "Close guess, but look closer. See how they're paired up, 2 by 2, and these longer marks between them?" Boone traced the pattern with one finger. "That's a rabbit's trail. See how he was hopping?" William's face lit up. "Really? How can you tell which way he went?" "The deeper impression shows where he pushed off. This fellow was heading toward that bramble patch yonder, probably has a burrow there." Boone pointed out more details, teaching William to read the story written in the snow. Evelyn watched them, struck by the gentle way Boone guided her nephew's learning. This was not the fierce gunman of reputation, but a patient teacher sharing hard-won knowledge. The sight stirred something unexpected in her heart. Near midday, they paused in a sheltered spot beneath the cottonwoods. Evelyn unpacked the cornbread she'd brought wrapped in a clean dish towel. William helped her spread it on a flat rock, making an impromptu table. "Much obliged," Boone said as she handed him a piece. He ate carefully, with better manner than she'd expected from a mountain man. "This is fine bread, Ms. Mayfield." "Aunt Evelyn makes the best cornbread in the territory," William declared loyally. "Even better than Mrs. Peterson at the church socials." They ate in comfortable silence, watching their breath steam in the cold air. The creek ice crackled softly, and somewhere a jay called. After a while, Boone spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Your father used to talk about you, you know. During that week, he nursed me back to health." Evelyn stilled, the cornbread forgotten in her hands. "He did?" "Yes, ma'am. Said you were a woman strong enough to hold this ranch against the world." His exact words. Boone's eyes held hers steadily. Reckon he knew what he was talking about. Emotion welled up in her throat. She looked away, pretending to brush crumbs from her skirt while she collected herself. Her father's faith in her had always been absolute, but hearing his words quoted back after so long, and by this man, shook her deeply. The sun was well past its peak when they started back toward the house. William had gathered interesting rocks in his pockets, making them clink as he walked. As they crested the last rise, Evelyn noticed movement on the road beyond their property, a wagon passing slowly, its occupants clearly watching them. "Appears we have an audience," Boone remarked dryly. "They'll be talking at the Mercantile before sundown," Evelyn said, her voice tight. The thought of becoming gossip fodder again made her stomach clench. "Let them talk." Boone's tone was matter-of-fact. "Nothing improper about showing a man your ranch in broad daylight, with your nephew along, as witness." They reached the yard as the winter sun touched the western hills. William rushed ahead to check on his chickens one last time before dark, leaving Evelyn and Boone standing by the house. "Thank you for showing me your land, Ms. Mayfield." He settled his hat more firmly against the evening wind. "It's a fine spread, and well-tended. You should be proud." "Thank you for being so patient with William's questions. He doesn't get many chances to learn woodcraft. He's a bright boy. Quick to learn." Boone hesitated, then added, "If you're willing, I'd like to call again. Maybe teach him more about tracking, with your permission." The request surprised her. Most men barely noticed William, seeing him only as an obstacle to courting her. But Boone seemed genuinely interested in the boy's education. "I'll consider it, Mr. Thatcher." He nodded, accepting her caution. "That's all I ask." "Good evening, Ms. Mayfield." She watched him lead his mule away, his figure growing smaller against the darkening sky. Inside, she found William already changed for bed, vibrating with excitement about his tracking lessons. "And did you see how he knew exactly where the rabbit was going?" And he said, "Next time, he might show me how to tell how old the tracks are." William bounced on his mattress as she tucked him in. "He's not scary at all, is he, Aunt Evelyn?" "Not like people say." "Hush now." She smoothed his hair back. Time for prayers and sleep. But after William's breathing had settled into the rhythm of dreams, Evelyn sat long in her rocking chair by the fire. Her heart felt uncertain, pulled between hope and fear. Hope because today had shown her a side of Boone Thatcher she never expected. Gentle, patient, respectful. Fear because she knew how quickly the town's whispers could turn cruel. She touched the Bible on the table beside her, drawing comfort from its familiar presence. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For tonight, she had seen something rare and precious, a glimpse of possibility, like tracks in fresh snow leading toward an unknown destination. The wagon wheels creaked as Evelyn guided her team down the rutted road toward Silver Crossing. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern hills, but already the air held promise of warmth. William sat beside her on the bench, swinging his feet and chattering about the dozen fresh eggs nestled in straw and the sack of extra flour she hoped to sell at the general store. "Reckon Mrs. Peterson might buy some eggs for her pies?" William asked hopefully. His aunt's silence made him glance up. "Aunt Evelyn, are you listening?" She wasn't. Her thoughts dwelled on yesterday's walk with Boone Thatcher, and on the wagon that had passed so slowly, carrying tales to town. Now she'd have to face whatever stories had sprouted overnight. The thought made her hands tighten on the reins. "I'm listening, dear." She forced a smile. "Mrs. Peterson usually does need eggs for her baking." The main street came into view, already busy with morning traffic. Wagons lined the hitching posts, and groups of townspeople moved between the bank, the mercantile, and the post office. As Evelyn pulled up in front of the general store, she felt the weight of stares. Conversations halted. Heads turned. "Well, if it ain't Ms. Mayfield," drawled Tom Wilson, lounging against a post. "Heard you had yourself quite the caller yesterday." His tone dripped with mockery. Evelyn kept her chin high as she helped William down from the wagon. "William, please fetch Mr. Green's cart from behind the store. We'll need it for loading supplies." The boy scampered off, leaving Evelyn to unload their goods. Alone. She could hear the whispers now carried on the morning breeze. That mountain man, bold as brass, walking her property in broad daylight. Scandalous, if you ask me. But not all the voices held scorn. Sarah Jenkins, the seamstress, gave Evelyn a warm smile as she passed. "Good morning, Evelyn. Those your fresh eggs? Save me a dozen?" Inside the store, the whispers followed. Evelyn moved through the aisles, gathering what they needed: coffee, sugar, lamp oil, fresh yeast for baking. Her shoulders stayed straight, though her cheeks burned at the poorly concealed stares. Near the back of the store, voices drifted from behind the seed bins. Men's voices, low and serious. "Prime water rights on that creek. Railroad's been buying up everything along that route. Widow woman can't hold out forever." Evelyn's hand froze on a tin of molasses. The railroad? Her father had always said their creek was the ranch's lifeblood without those water rights. "Aunt Evelyn!" William's excited shout broke through her worries. "Look who's here!" She turned to see William perched high on Boone Thatcher's broad shoulders, the boy's face glowing with delight. Boone ducked slightly to clear the doorframe, one hand steady on William's leg. "Found this young scout practicing his tracking," Boone said, his eyes twinkling. "Followed him right to your wagon." The store had gone silent. Even Mr. Green behind the counter stood watching, mouth slightly open. Boone ignored them all, setting William gently down. "Looks like you're restocking," he said, noting her half-filled basket. "Need any help carrying?" Before Evelyn could respond, he took the heavy basket from her arms. His calloused fingers brushed hers for just a moment, sending an unexpected warmth through her chest. "I can manage," she protested weakly. "No doubt." Boone's voice held respect, not condescension. "But a gentleman offers aid when he can." He turned to Mr. Green. "Add whatever the lady needs to my account." The storekeeper stammered, "But Mr. Thatcher, that ain't customary." "Then we'll make it so." Boone's tone brooked no argument. "Ms. Mayfield's credit is as good as mine." Evelyn felt her face flame, but couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing Tom Wilson and his cronies shuffle awkwardly away from the counter. William bounced on his toes, clearly impressed by Boone's commanding presence. They loaded the supplies together, Boone handling the heavy sacks while William proudly carried smaller items. The townsfolk still stared, but their whispers held a different note now. Respect, perhaps, or at least caution. On the ride home, William chattered about how Boone had shown him more tracking signs in the dusty street. Evelyn let the boy's excitement wash over her, but her mind churned with questions. When William ran ahead to check on his chickens, she finally spoke. "Mr. Thatcher, I appreciate your help today, but—" She hesitated. "I don't understand why you're doing this." "The talk in town." "Let them talk." Boone's voice was steady. "A woman's dignity is worth more than whispers." He spoke simply, without flourish, yet something in his tone made Evelyn's throat tight. Before she could respond, William called from the barn about a loose board, and Boone excused himself to help. The afternoon passed in familiar chores. Evelyn stored their purchases, fed the stock, helped William with his letters, but her mind kept returning to those whispered words in the store. The railroad, water rights, her father's beloved ranch at risk. As evening settled over the land, Evelyn sat at her father's old desk, the leather-bound ledger open before her. The lamp cast a warm circle of light as she recorded the day's transactions in careful columns. The familiar routine usually calmed her, but tonight her hand trembled slightly on the pen. Through the window came the steady rhythm of steel on stone. Boone, sharpening her old axe by lantern light. She hadn't asked him to stay, yet somehow his presence felt right, like a guard dog settling on the porch. Safe. Protective. William's soft snores drifted from his bedroom. Evelyn closed the ledger and knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer. The floor was hard beneath her knees, but she barely noticed. "Lord," she whispered, "guide my path. Show me how to protect this land, this boy, this legacy Papa left in my care." She paused, then added softly, "And help me understand this man you've sent, with his gentle hands and fierce heart." Outside, the rasp of stone on steel continued, steady as a heartbeat. Evelyn rose, her knees creaking, and moved to check on William. He slept peacefully, one arm thrown above his head, his face smooth in the lamplight. So young, so trusting. He deserved more than whispers and threats to his future. The railroad might come, the town might talk, but watching her nephew's innocent sleep, Evelyn felt steel enter her spine. She had her father's strength, Boone's unexpected alliance, and most importantly, God's grace. Whatever storms approached, she would weather them. She didn't need to look out the window to know Boone still kept his vigil. His quiet presence spoke louder than any declaration in the churchyard. Tonight, at least, they were not alone. 2 days after the visit to town, spring sunshine warmed the ranch yard as Evelyn hung laundry on the line. The white sheets snapped in the breeze, filling the air with the clean scent of soap. William sat cross-legged nearby, whittling a piece of wood with the small knife Boone had given him. The thunder of approaching hooves broke the peaceful morning. 2 riders appeared on the road, their fine clothes and polished boots marking them as city men. Evelyn's hands stilled on the damp sheet as they dismounted at her gate. "Mrs. Mayfield?" The taller man removed his bowler hat, revealing slicked-back hair. "I'm Theodore Wells, representing the Western Pacific Railroad Company. This is my associate, Mr. Harrison." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron. "What brings railroad men to my door?" "Business, ma'am. Profitable business, we hope." Wells smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "May we discuss the matter inside?" William had stopped whittling, watching the strangers with wary eyes. Evelyn gestured toward the house. "The parlor will do." Inside, Wells spread a map across her father's old table. Red lines marked proposed railroad routes, including one that cut straight through her property. "As you can see, Mrs. Mayfield, your creek lies directly in our planned right-of-way." Wells tapped the paper. "The company is prepared to make a generous offer for your water rights and the affected acreage." "My water rights aren't for sale." Evelyn's voice was firm. "That creek waters my cattle and irrigates my fields." Harrison spoke up, his tone condescending. "Ma'am, you must understand the railroad is coming through this valley. Progress can't be stopped." "Then progress can find another route." Evelyn stood straighter, her father's teachings echo in her mind. "This land has been in my family for 20 years. The water rights are legally recorded." Wells's smile thinned. "A widow woman alone. Surely you see how difficult it would be to maintain such a large property without assistance." His pause carried clear threat. "The railroad has considerable influence in these parts. Banks, merchants, cattle buyers, all depend on good relations with us." Evelyn's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Wells?" "Merely stating facts, ma'am. The smart play would be to sell now, while the offer's generous." The creak of floorboards announced another presence. Boone Thatcher filled the doorway, his scarred face dark with barely contained anger. William peeked around him, having apparently run to fetch the mountain man from the barn. Seems to me, Boone rumbled, the smart play would be for you fellows to leave. Now. Wells stiffened. This is a private business discussion. It's harassment. Boone stepped into the room. And it's finished. Harrison's hand twitched toward his coat, but Boone's cold stare froze him. Everyone knew Boone Thatcher's reputation with a gun. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Mayfield. Wells gathered his map, dignity ruffled. Do consider our offer carefully. After they'd ridden away, Evelyn sank into her father's chair. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt. They mean to take it all, she whispered. The creek, the grazing land, everything Papa built. Boone leaned against the mantel, his face grim. Railroad's been pushing through everywhere, buying or burning folks out. They don't stop at threats, neither. What can we do, Aunt Evelyn? William's young voice quavered. She pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of sunshine and soap in his hair. We'll protect our home, dear heart. That's what we'll do. Boone's voice was gentle but firm. They'll be back. With lawyers, maybe hired guns. I've seen it before. Then we'll face them. Evelyn met his eyes. I won't be driven off my father's land. The day passed in a blur of normal chores, but tension hung in the air like storm clouds. Boone stayed close, checking fences and helping with the stock. His presence both comforted and confused Evelyn. Was he here out of obligation to her father's memory? Or something more? That evening, after supper was cleared away, Evelyn sat with William by the fire. The boy curled against her side, his usual chatter subdued. Will we lose the ranch, Auntie? He finally asked in a small voice. Evelyn's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady as she hugged him close. No, dear one. This is our home, and we're going to keep it safe. Your grandfather built this place with his own hands, and we won't let anyone take it from us. But the railroad men are just men, William, and we have something stronger than their threats. We have faith and love and right on our side. She kissed his forehead. Now, time for bed. Say your prayers. After tucking William in, Evelyn found Boone on the porch, staring into the darkness. The lamplight from inside cast his shadow long across the wooden boards. Thank you, she said quietly, for being here today. He turned, his face half in shadow. I'll always be here. Those railroad vultures won't touch you or the boy. Mr. Thatcher, Evelyn stepped closer. Boone, I need to say something. He waited, silent. I'm grateful for your help, truly. But I'm not a damsel in need of rescue. She squared her shoulders. If your intention to court me is genuine, it must be as a partner, not a guardian. I've run this ranch alone since James died. I know my own mind and my own strength. Boone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held respect. You're right. Shouldn't have presumed. You're the strongest person I know, Evelyn Mayfield. Man or woman. Then we understand each other? He nodded solemnly. Partners. A cold wind swept across the porch, making the lamp flame flutter. Evelyn shivered, wrapping her shawl tighter. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the darkened valley. They won't stop at threats, Boone said softly. Railroads got money and men to spare. I know. Evelyn's voice was steady. But neither will I stop fighting for what's mine. They stood together in the lamplight, watching the darkness deepen over the land they both meant to protect. Partner to partner, strength matching strength, neither backing down from the storm ahead. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Boone's familiar figure appeared on the road to the Mayfield ranch. The early morning air still held winter's bite, though spring was creeping into the valley. He led his mule, loaded with tools and timber, the animal's breath forming small clouds in the cool air. Evelyn had been up since before first light, stoking the cook stove and setting bread to rise. The familiar rhythm of morning chores helped steady her nerves. Through the kitchen window, she watched Boone approach, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the brightening sky. William burst from the house like a jackrabbit, barely remembering to close the screen door behind him. "Mr. Boone! Are you gonna fix our roof today?" "That's the plan, boy." Boone ruffled William's hair as Evelyn stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ma'am, noticed that loose section over the hay storage last time I was here. Thought I might lend a hand if you're willing." Evelyn hesitated. Accepting help meant admitting need, something she'd avoided since James died. But the roof did need mending, and hiring help would strain her limited funds. "Much obliged, Mr. Thatcher, though you needn't trouble yourself." "No trouble." His eyes met hers, steady and warm. "And it's Boone, remember?" She nodded, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Well then, Boone, there's coffee fresh on the stove, if you'd like some before you start." The kitchen felt smaller with Boone's presence filling it. He sat carefully in one of her sturdy chairs, handling the delicate china cup with surprisingly gentle hands. William perched beside him, practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you really sleep in a cave once, Mr. Boone? In bear country?" "Several times." Boone sipped his coffee. "Sometimes a cave's the best shelter you can find in the mountains." "Weren't you scared?" "Being scared's natural, boy. The trick is knowing what to do about it." Boone glanced at Evelyn. "Your aunt knows about being brave. Running this ranch alone takes more courage than facing any bear." Evelyn busied herself at the stove, touched by the compliment. "The bread needs kneading," she said, more gruffly than she meant to. "And that roof won't fix itself." Boone set down his empty cup. "Yes, ma'am. William, want to learn how to check timber for rot?" The boy nearly knocked over his chair in his eagerness to follow Boone outside. Evelyn watched through the window as they unloaded the mule, Boone patiently showing William how to test each board's strength. His gentleness with the boy stirred something in her heart she'd thought long buried. The morning passed in a steady rhythm of work. The sound of hammering echoed across the yard as Boone stripped away damaged shingles. William scrambled up and down the ladder, fetching tools and proudly carrying away scraps of old wood. Evelyn tried to focus on her own chores, but found her eyes drawn again and again to the barn. "Watch your footing now," Boone called down to William. "Always keep 3 points of contact on the ladder." "Like a mountain goat." William's voice carried clearly. Boone's deep laugh rolled across the yard. "Smarter than a goat, I hope. Your aunt would have my height if I let you fall." "She likes you, you know," William said matter-of-factly. "She smiles more when you're here." Evelyn felt her face flame. She hadn't realized her feelings were so obvious, even to a child. Through the window, she saw Boone pause in his work, hammer suspended mid-swing. "That so?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Well, I reckon that's good to hear." The boy continued, unaware of the weight of his words. "And do you really live all alone in the mountains? Didn't you get lonely?" "Everyone gets lonely sometimes, William." Boone resumed his hammering. "But a man's got to learn to live with himself before he can live with others." "Is that why you came down from the mountains?" There was a long pause before Boone answered. "Partly. Sometimes a man needs more than just himself for company. Needs a home, maybe. A family." Evelyn's hands trembled as she shaped her bread dough. The simple honesty in Boone's words touched something deep inside her, a longing she'd tried to ignore. She'd convinced herself that being a widow, being large, meant she'd never know that kind of love again. But Boone's steady presence was challenging those beliefs one day at a time. By mid-afternoon, the new roof section gleamed in the sun. Boone climbed down, his shirt dark with sweat despite the cool air. William had fallen asleep in the shade of the barn, exhausted from his eager helping. "Job's done," Boone said, approaching the porch where Evelyn sat mending. "Should hold tight now, even in the worst weather." "Thank you." She set aside her sewing. "You must be hungry." Supper's nearly ready, if you'd care to stay." His eyes brightened. "I'd like that very much." The meal started quietly, each of them aware of the growing intimacy of sharing food at day's end. William, refreshed from his nap, soon filled the silence with chatter about everything he'd learned about roof repair and mountain survival. "And Mr. Boone says he can teach me to track deer." The boy's fork waved enthusiastically. "Can he come again tomorrow, Aunt Evelyn?" "Please?" "Mind your manners," Evelyn chided gently. "Mr. Thatcher likely has his own affairs to tend to." "Nothing that can't wait." Boone savored another bite of stew. "This is mighty fine cooking, Evelyn." "Been a long time since I've had a meal this good." She felt the blush creep up her neck at his praise. "It's just simple fare." "Simple's best when it's made with care." His eyes held hers across the table. "Speaking of, there's something I'd like to ask you." William fell silent, watching them both with bright interest. "The church picnic is coming up Sunday." Boone's voice was gruff but gentle. "Thought maybe you might do me the honor of accompanying me." "You and William both, of course." Evelyn's heart fluttered. The church picnic meant facing the whole town, their whispers and stares. But Boone's steady gaze held no doubt, no shame. Only warmth, and something that looked remarkably like hope. She glanced at William's eager face. "Yes. We'd be glad to join you." "Hurrah!" William bounced in his chair. "Can I help carry the basket?" "What are you going to make, Aunt Evelyn? Your apple pie?" "Settle down now." She laughed, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. "Plenty of time to plan all that." After the dishes were cleared and William had been shooed off to bed, Boone lingered by the door. The evening star hung bright in the darkening sky, a single point of light in the gathering dusk. "Thank you for today," Evelyn said softly. "For everything." "My pleasure." He shifted his hat in his hands. "You've got a fine boy there. And a fine home. Man would be blessed to be part of such a family." The words hung between them, full of meaning. Evelyn found herself holding her breath, wondering if he would say more. But Boone simply nodded, settling his hat on his head. "Good night, Evelyn. I'll see you Sunday." She watched him walk into the starlit night, his figure merging with the shadows. Inside, she could hear William's voice drifting down the stairs as he said his prayers, Boone's name mixed in with his usual blessings. Moving through the familiar routine of securing the house for night, Evelyn felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. She checked the doors, banked the fire, and finally lifted the lamp to carry upstairs. In William's room, she paused to brush a gentle hand over his sleeping forehead. "Mr. Boone," he murmured, smiling in his dreams. "Teach me about the mountains." At last, in her own room, Evelyn set the lamp on her bedside table. Its gentle light cast a warm glow as she knelt for her own prayers. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for unexpected blessings, for strong hands and gentle hearts, for hope." She blew out the lamp, letting darkness wrap around her like a familiar blanket. Outside, a whippoorwill called, its song carrying across the peaceful night. Inside her chest, her heart felt full and warm, beginning to trust in the possibility of love again. Sunday morning painted the sky in shades of pearl and gold, blessing silver crossing with the kind of crisp, clear weather that made hearts lift toward heaven. Evelyn stood before her mirror, smoothing her best calico dress with trembling hands. The blue fabric, dotted with tiny white flowers, had been carefully pressed the night before. She'd even added a fresh white collar that brightened her face. "Aunt Evelyn, he's here!" William's excited voice carried up the stairs, and he's wearing his good coat. Evelyn's heart fluttered as she pinned her hat securely. Through her bedroom window, she could see Boone already unhitching his mule to help guide their wagon. He had indeed dressed for the occasion, his black coat brushed free of dust, his boots polished to a shine. Even from this distance, she could see he'd trimmed his beard. The stairs creaked softly under her weight as she descended. William bounced by the door in his Sunday best, his hair still damp from her attempts to tame it with water. When Boone stepped onto the porch, his hat in his hands, his eyes found hers immediately. "Miss Mayfield." His voice was soft with appreciation. "You look mighty fine this morning." "Thank you, Mr. Thatcher." She couldn't quite meet his gaze, her cheeks warming. "You're looking well yourself." William tugged at Boone's sleeve. "Did you bring your gun? In case the railroad men come?" "William," Evelyn scolded, "this is the Lord's Day. We'll have no talk of such things." Boone knelt to the boy's level. "Your aunt's right. Today's for praise and fellowship, but don't you worry, I aim to keep you both safe, gun or no gun." The wagon ride to town was peaceful, with Boone handling the reins while Evelyn held the covered basket of food she'd prepared. William sat between them, pointing out rabbits and meadowlarks along the way. The morning sun warmed their backs, and the fresh-washed sky seemed to promise good things ahead. As they approached the church grounds, Evelyn's nerves began to dance. Families were already gathering, spreading blankets on the grass, setting out dishes on long tables. Children darted between groups, their Sunday clothes already showing signs of play. All activity seemed to pause as Boone brought the wagon to a stop. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Boone helped Evelyn down, his strong hands steady and sure. She heard fragments of conversation carried on the breeze. "Mountain Man?" "Widow Mayfield." Such an odd pair. But Boone acted as if he heard nothing, carrying their basket and blanket to a pleasant spot beneath a broad oak tree. William helped spread the blanket while Evelyn began setting out their contribution to the feast: fried chicken, fresh bread, and her famous apple pie. "Smells wonderful," Boone said, his eyes crinkling with genuine appreciation. "You've outdone yourself, Evelyn." More families arrived, and soon the air was filled with the sounds of fellowship. Children's laughter, women calling greetings, men discussing crops and weather. The Reverend called everyone together for prayer, and Evelyn felt Boone's hand brush hers as they bowed their heads. After the blessing, games began for the children. William joined in a game of horseshoes, his clear voice carrying across the grounds as he celebrated each throw. Evelyn watched him fondly, grateful for his uncomplicated joy. "He's a fine boy," Boone said quietly beside her. "Deserves a proper family." Before she could respond, the singing started. Hymns rose into the autumn air, voices blending in familiar praise. Evelyn sang along softly, aware of Boone's deep bass joining in beside her. His voice was untrained but true, and something about its earnestness made her heart ache sweetly. As the last notes of Amazing Grace faded into the afternoon air, Boone suddenly rose to his feet. The movement drew all eyes to him, and Evelyn felt her breath catch as he stepped forward to face the gathering. "Good people of Silver Crossing," his voice carried clearly across the grounds. "I've got something to say, and I aim to say it proper, before God and this community." The crowd fell silent. Even the children stopped their play, sensing something important was about to happen. Evelyn's heart began to pound so hard she feared everyone could hear it. "Most of you know me as a mountain man, a loner." Boone's eyes swept the crowd before settling on Evelyn. "And that's what I was, till I found something worth coming down from the mountains for." Someone worth changing for. He turned fully toward Evelyn now, his expression more open and vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "Miss Evelyn Mayfield, you're the strongest, kindest woman I've ever known. You work this land with wisdom, raise this boy with love, and carry yourself with a dignity that puts most folks to shame." A gasp rippled through the crowd as Boone stepped closer and slowly lowered himself to one knee before her. William crept closer, his eyes wide with wonder. "I know I'm not the kind of man most women dream of." Boone's voice grew softer, meant mainly for her, though everyone strained to hear. I've got rough hands and a rougher past, but I swear before God and these witnesses, I'll spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. The world seemed to narrow to just this moment, just his earnest face turned up to hers. She was aware of the crowd holding its collective breath, of William clutching her skirts, of the autumn sun warming her shoulders. But most of all, she was aware of her heart, beating out a truth she could no longer deny. "Yes," she whispered, then louder so all could hear. "Yes, I will." The silence broke. William whooped with joy, throwing himself at them both. Some in the crowd applauded, while others muttered disapprovingly. But Evelyn barely noticed as Boone rose and carefully, tenderly, took her hand in his. "Thank you," he said simply. But his eyes held volumes more. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations and curious stares. Some women approached with genuine good wishes, while others held back, whispering behind their hands. The men mostly nodded respectfully to Boone, something like admiration in their eyes for his bold declaration. As the sun began its descent, they packed up their wagon for the ride home. William was still bubbling with excitement, making plans for where Boone would sleep and which horse he'd ride. Evelyn felt as if she were floating, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Back at the ranch, the familiar sight of home grounded her even as joy continued to sing through her veins. Boone helped her down from the wagon one last time, his touch lingering. "I'll come by tomorrow," he promised. "Start making proper arrangements." "I'd like that," she said softly. William hugged Boone fiercely before allowing himself to be steered inside to wash up for supper. Evelyn moved through the kitchen, lighting lamps against the gathering dusk, her movements seeming to float rather than walk. As she set places at the table, 3 now, she realized with a surge of happiness, movement caught her eye through the window. A rider sat motionless on the distant ridge, barely visible in the failing light. Something about the way they sat, watching the ranch, sent a chill down her spine despite her joy. But before she could look closer, the rider wheeled their horse and vanished into the growing darkness, leaving only questions in their wake. Morning sunlight streamed through Evelyn's kitchen windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. She hummed softly while kneading bread dough, her heart light despite her aching hands. William sat at the table, practicing his letters while stealing glances at the window, hoping to catch sight of Boone's approach. The sharp rap of knuckles on the doorframe startled them both. Instead of Boone's broad-shouldered silhouette, Deputy Silas Crane filled the doorway, his tin star catching the morning light. "Miss Mayfield," he said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Might I have a word?" Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron, trying to hide their trembling. "William, go tend to the chickens." "But Auntie..." "Now, please." The boy slipped past the deputy, shooting him a suspicious glance. Deputy Crane stepped into the kitchen, his boots leaving dusty prints on her clean floor. "Heard about the spectacle at yesterday's picnic," he said, running a finger along the back of a chair. "Quite the declaration from our local mountain man. If you've come to offer congratulations, Deputy, you could have waited for Sunday service." Evelyn kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Oh, this ain't about congratulations." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "This is about fraud, Miss Mayfield. Pure and simple." "Fraud." The word fell like a stone between them. "That's right. See, word is Boone Thatcher's been making deals with claim jumpers up in the mountains. Man like that, suddenly interested in a widow with prime water rights?" He shook his head. "Mighty suspicious timing, what with the railroad taking interest in these parts." The crunch of boots on gravel announced Boone's arrival. He filled the doorway, his expression darkening at the sight of Deputy Crane. "Speaking ill of me, Deputy." Boone's voice was dangerously soft. Crane turned slowly, his hand resting near his holster. Just sharing some concerns with Miss Mayfield about how some men might try to secure a deed through alternative means. Boone's muscles tensed, but he remained still. My intentions toward Miss Mayfield are honest and true, unlike some who wear a badge but serve railroad money. Careful, Thatcher. Crane's fingers drummed against his gun belt. That sounds mighty close to questioning an officer of the law. Gentlemen, Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. This is still my home, and I'll thank you both to remember that. Crane touched the brim of his hat. Just doing my duty, ma'am. Warning you that the railroad will be contesting your ownership of this land. Might want to have those deeds ready. He stepped toward the door, pausing beside Boone. And you, mountain man, better watch your step. Law's got a long memory for troublemakers. They watched him mount up and ride away, his horse kicking up dust in the yard. As soon as he was out of sight, Evelyn's legs gave way. She sank into a chair, pressing her hands against her face. Boone knelt beside her. Evelyn, look at me. His calloused fingers gently pulled her hands away. We need to prove your claim. Do you have your father's deed? She nodded, gathering her strength. In his old chest, wrapped in oilcloth just as he left it. Then we'll ride to the courthouse tomorrow. Show them the truth of your ownership. William burst in, his face flushed. I heard everything from the chicken coop. Are they trying to steal our ranch, Auntie? Evelyn opened her arms, and he ran into them. No one's stealing anything, dear heart. We have right and truth on our side. And me, Boone added, quietly. Evelyn crossed to her father's old sea chest, its brass fittings dull with age. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, just as she'd said, lay the deed to the ranch. Her father's bold signature marked the bottom, along with the county clerk's official seal. She handled it reverently, remembering how her father had shown it to her years ago, explaining the importance of protecting their water rights. This land is our future, he'd said. Guard it well. The afternoon passed slowly, tension hanging in the air like storm clouds. As evening approached, Boone sat with William on the porch, teaching him to whittle. Evelyn paused in her cooking to watch through the window, her heart warming at the sight. Hold the knife away from yourself, Boone instructed, guiding William's small hands. Let the wood tell you what it wants to be. I want it to be a horse, William declared. Like the ones you rode in the mountains. A horse it is, then. Boone's large hands dwarfed the boys as they worked together, wood shavings curling at their feet. Evelyn smiled softly, seeing how gentle the scarred mountain man could be, how different he was from the violent reputation that preceded him. She turned back to her stove, stirring the stew and adding a pinch more salt. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of approaching horses. Multiple riders moving fast. Evelyn's heart leaped to her throat as she rushed to the window. In the gathering dusk, she could make out several mounted figures passing the edge of her property. Their silhouettes looked black against the moon-bright sky like ravens bringing ill omens. Boone was on his feet in an instant, ushering William inside. Get away from the windows, he ordered quietly, reaching for his rifle. The riders didn't stop, but their message was clear enough. They were watching, waiting, ready to strike. Evelyn's hands shook as she lit the evening lamps. William pressed against her side, his half-carved horse clutched tight in his fingers. I'm scared, Auntie, he whispered. I know, dear heart. She stroked his hair, but fear won't help us now. We need faith and courage. Boone checked his rifle's action, the metal clicking softly in the quiet room. I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Keep watch. No. Evelyn's voice was firm. We face this together. There's a cot in the back room. You'll sleep there. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Together, then. While Boone made another circuit of the property, Evelyn knelt beside her bed. The familiar words of prayer came easily, though her heart was troubled. Lord, give us strength, she whispered, not just to endure, but to stand firm, to protect what's right and true. Through the window, she could see Boone's figure moving in the moonlight, rifle ready, a guardian in the darkness. The sight brought both comfort and worry. Comfort in his protection, worry for what tomorrow might bring, but as she rose from her prayers, her spine straightened with determination. The railroad men, the deputy, all their threats. They thought her weak because of her size, because she was a woman alone. They were wrong. She had her father's strength, her own courage, and now Boone's steadfast heart beside her. She would not yield. Not 1 inch of the land her father had worked so hard to claim. Not 1 drop of the precious water that gave life to their ranch. Whatever came tomorrow, she would face it standing tall, with faith in her heart and truth as her shield. William's small voice came from his room. "Auntie, could you sing that hymn? The one about not being afraid?" Evelyn's clear voice lifted in the lamplight, singing of peace in troubled times. As she sang, Boone's boots scraped on the porch, and she heard him settle into the rocker, keeping his vigil. The night pressed close around the little house, but inside, faith and love held the darkness at bay. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight they would hold fast to each other, to hope, and to the promise of justice yet to come. Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pink and gold as Evelyn moved through her kitchen, packing cornbread and dried apple slices for their journey to town. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the food in a clean cloth, aware of how much rested on proving their claim at the courthouse. Boone stood by the window, his rifle propped against the wall as he sipped coffee from a tin cup. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and his eyes never stopped scanning the yard, watchful as always. "William," Evelyn called softly. "Best get your coat on, dear." The morning still got frost in it. The boy bounded down the stairs, already dressed in his Sunday best. "Are we taking the wagon or riding, Auntie?" "Wagon," Boone answered, setting down his cup. "More proper for courthouse business." Evelyn gathered the oilcloth-wrapped deed and tucked it carefully into her basket. Her father's signature lay beneath those folds, the proof of their rightful claim to this land. She touched the cloth briefly, drawing strength from its presence. The crunch of approaching hooves made them all freeze. Boone's hand moved to his rifle, but before he could reach it, the deputy's voice rang out. "Thatcher, step out where we can see you." William pressed against Evelyn's side as they moved to the door. Deputy Crane sat astride his horse, flanked by 2 hard-faced men Evelyn didn't recognize. All 3 had their hands near their holsters. "Come on out. Nice and easy." Crane called again, his voice carrying false authority. "Got some papers here need serving." Boone squeezed Evelyn's shoulder once, then stepped onto the porch. "What's this about, deputy?" Crane dismounted, pulling a folded document from his vest. "Boone Thatcher, you're under arrest for attempted land fraud and conspiracy to deceive the territorial court." "That's a lie," William burst out, but Evelyn held him back. "These charges are false," she said, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "Boone's intentions are honest. We have the deed." "Ma'am," one of the other men cut in, "we have sworn statements saying otherwise. Your friend here has a history of trouble with the law. Pattern of deception, they say." Boone's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "You're making a mistake, Crane. One that'll cost you when the truth comes out." The deputy's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll let the judge sort that out. Now you coming peaceful, or do we need to make this harder?" William broke free from Evelyn's grip, running to wrap his arms around Boone's waist. "Don't let them take you. Please." Tears burned in Evelyn's eyes as she watched Boone gently disentangle the boy's arms. He knelt down to William's level, his scarred hands gentle on the child's shoulders. "Hey now, no crying," he said softly. "Need you to be strong for your aunt." "Can you do that for me?" William nodded, though his chest still hitched with sobs. Boone turned to Evelyn, and the look they shared spoke volumes. His eyes held steady confidence, telling her without words, that this wasn't the end. "I'll return," he said simply. "That's a promise." The deputies moved forward, binding Boone's hands with rope. Evelyn's heart clenched at the sight, but she forced herself to stand tall. She wouldn't let them see her break. "This won't stand," she declared, her voice carrying across the yard. "The truth will come out." Crane's smirk widened as they led Boone to a waiting horse. "Truth's a funny thing, Miss Mayfield. Seems to change depending on who's telling it." They mounted up, Boone now sitting awkwardly on a spare horse, his bound hands gripping the saddle horn. He looked back once, meeting Evelyn's eyes with that same steady gaze that had first won her trust. William pressed against her skirts as they watched the riders disappear down the road, dust rising in their wake. When they were gone, the morning seemed colder somehow, the sun's warmth unable to reach them. "What do we do now, Auntie?" William's voice quavered. Evelyn squeezed his shoulder, though her own heart felt like lead in her chest. "We do what needs doing, dear heart. The ranch won't run itself." They moved through their daily chores like sleepwalkers. Evelyn's hands worked automatically, feeding chickens, checking fences, pumping water, while her mind churned with worry. William was unusually quiet, his usual chatter replaced by occasional sniffles. The day stretched endless before them, marked only by the sun's slow arc across the sky. When evening finally came, Evelyn prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The empty chair at their table seemed to mock them with its silence. William pushed his food around his plate, barely eating. "It's not fair," he whispered. "Boone didn't do anything wrong." "No, he didn't." Evelyn reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "But sometimes good people face hard times. That's when we have to be strongest. Like in the Bible, when Daniel was in the lion's den." A small smile touched Evelyn's lips. "Just like that. God didn't abandon Daniel, and he won't abandon us either." After the dishes were cleared, they sat together by the hearth. The familiar crackle of the fire should have been comforting, but tonight it only emphasized the absence of Boone's deep voice, his quiet presence that had become so much a part of their evenings. Evelyn held the deed in her lap, its oilcloth wrapping smooth beneath her fingers. William curled against her side, his small body seeking comfort. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the valley with a mournful sound. She found herself whispering verses she'd learned as a child, words of comfort passed down through generations. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" William's breathing gradually steadied as he drifted toward sleep. Evelyn stroked his hair, remembering how Boone had taught him to whittle just yesterday. How quickly peace could shatter, like a mirror dropped on stone. The wind's keening grew stronger, rattling the windows in their frames. Evelyn held William closer, fighting back tears she couldn't afford to shed. She was the strong one now, the protector, the keeper of their home. She couldn't falter. But in the deepening darkness, with William's trusting weight against her side, she allowed herself to whisper one more prayer. "Lord, keep him safe. Give us both strength for whatever comes, and please bring him back to us." The fire's flames danced lower, casting long shadows on the walls. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, Evelyn could only wait, holding fast to faith and the warm weight of her sleeping nephew. The deed remained clutched in her free hand, a reminder of all they stood to lose, and all they would fight to keep. The valley's darkness pressed against the windows, and Evelyn sensed that this was only the beginning. The storm gathering around them would grow worse before it broke. But like the deed in her hands, like the love in her heart, like the faith in her soul, she would hold firm. She had to, for William, for Boone, for the land her father had entrusted to her care. No matter what came next, she would face it with the strength God gave her, one day at a time. The lantern's glow flickered against the rough-hewn walls of the small chapel, casting dancing shadows across the wooden cross her father had carved years ago. Evelyn's knees pressed against the hard floor as she bowed her head, Her hands clasped tightly together. The tiny building, barely larger than a storage shed, held years of prayers within its weathered walls. Her father had built this chapel with his own hands, saying every ranch needed a place where heaven could touch earth. Now, in the depths of night, Evelyn sought that connection desperately. "Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "protect Boone. Keep him safe in that jail cell. Give me the wisdom to prove his innocence and the strength to defend what you've given us." The door creaked softly. William's small figure slipped inside, his stocking feet silent on the wooden boards. Without a word, he knelt beside her, his shoulder pressing against her arm. The warmth of his presence steadied her. "God will help us, Auntie," William whispered, his young voice full of certainty. "Just like he helped David fight Goliath." Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. She wrapped an arm around his shoulders, drawing him closer. "Yes, he will, dear heart." The lantern's flame cast their joined shadows on the wall, and something shifted inside Evelyn's heart. The fear and uncertainty crystallized into something harder, stronger. She thought of her father's teachings, of his belief in standing firm against injustice. She thought of Boone, alone in a cell, faithful to his word. "We won't let them win," she murmured, as much to herself as to William. "This land is ours. Boone is innocent, and we're going to prove it." They stayed there, aunt and nephew, until the lantern burned low. When they finally returned to the house, Evelyn's mind was clear. She knew what needed to be done. Long before dawn, while the stars still glittered in the black sky, Evelyn rose from her bed. Her muscles protested from yesterday's tension, but she ignored the discomfort. There was work to be done. She dressed quickly in her warmest clothes, adding an extra petticoat against the winter chill. In the kitchen, she packed a cloth bag with journey bread, jerky, and dried apples. A blanket and extra quilts followed, along with the precious deed wrapped in oilcloth. William appeared in the doorway, already dressed. "I'm ready, Auntie." "Good boy," she said, managing a smile. "We've got a long day ahead. Help me with the horses." Together, they stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air as they made their way to the barn. The familiar scents of hay and horse greeted them, along with soft nickering from the stalls. Evelyn's hands moved surely as she harnessed the team to the wagon. The leather was stiff with cold, but she worked steadily, checking each buckle and strap. Her father had taught her well. A proper rancher needed to handle every task alone if necessary. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale when they finished. Evelyn helped William up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside him. The deed and provisions were secured under the seat, protected from the elements. "It's a full day's journey to the courthouse," she told William, gathering the reins. "We'll need to be strong." William nodded solemnly. "Like pioneers." The sun crept over the horizon as they set out, painting the snow-dusted landscape in shades of rose and gold. The wagon wheels creaked through frozen ruts, and the horses' hooves struck a steady rhythm on the hard ground. The road stretched before them, winding through valleys where shadows still lingered. Patches of snow filled the hollows and northern slopes, glinting like scattered diamonds in the strengthening light. The air was sharp with winter's bite, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from distant homesteads. Evelyn's hands grew raw on the reins, but she kept a firm grip. Every jolt and bump of the wagon tested her determination. William huddled close, sharing warmth and occasionally pointing out deer or rabbits in the brush. At noon, they stopped beside a creek locked in winter's grip. Ice stretched across the water like clouded glass, with only a thin thread of current visible in the center. Evelyn's fingers were stiff as she unwrapped their simple meal. "Here," she said, passing William a piece of journey bread and jerky. "Eat up. We need to keep our strength." They ate in companionable silence, listening to the whisper of wind through bare branches and the distant call of winter birds. Evelyn flexed her hands, wincing at the blisters forming on her palms. She had another half-day's driving ahead. "Does it hurt?" William asked, noticing her discomfort. "Some things are worth a little pain," she answered, giving him a reassuring smile. Remember what your grandfather used to say? The Lord gives us trials to make us stronger. William nodded, his young face serious. Like tempering steel in the blacksmith's forge. Exactly like that. Evelyn wrapped the remaining food and checked the horses' harnesses. Ready to continue? The afternoon wore on, marked by the sun's slow arc across the pale winter sky. Evelyn's hands grew numb, then painful, then numb again. The blisters broke and reformed. Still, she drove on, measuring their progress by familiar landmarks. The lightning-struck oak, the three-pronged rock formation, the abandoned settler's cabin. As darkness began to gather, they finally spotted the way station, a simple building offering shelter to travelers. The yard was empty, which suited Evelyn fine. She wasn't ready to face strangers' questions. She parked the wagon in the lee of the building where the wind was blocked. "We'll sleep here tonight," she told William. "Safer to travel in daylight." Together, they arranged the quilts in the wagon bed, creating a nest of warmth. The horses, unharnessed and rubbed down, stood quietly in the station's lean-to, munching on hay Evelyn had brought. William curled up against her side, wrapped in layers of wool and cotton. Above them, the sky was a vast bowl of stars, crystalline in the winter night. "Auntie?" William's voice was sleepy. "Do you think Boone can see the stars from jail?" Evelyn's heart clenched. "I hope so, dear one. I hope so." After William's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, Evelyn gazed up at the glittering heavens. Her father had taught her the constellations from this same angle, lying in a wagon bed under God's infinite sky. "Tomorrow, Lord," she whispered into the darkness. "Give me strength. For William. For Boone. For the land you've entrusted to us. Let justice prevail." The night wind whispered through the trees, carrying her prayer upward. Evelyn pulled the quilts closer around them, sheltering William from the cold. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now she found comfort in the stars' steady light and the warmth of faith in her heart. Sleep came slowly, accompanied by the soft sounds of horses shifting in their shelter, and William's quiet breathing. Evelyn's last conscious thought was of Boone, and she prayed he could feel their love reaching through the miles between them, carried on the wings of starlight and faith. The courthouse rose before them like a mountain of red brick and white stone, its steps worn smooth by years of boots and justice. Evelyn gripped William's small hand as they climbed those steps, her other arm clutching the precious oilcloth package that held their future. William's eyes were wide, taking in the towering columns and heavy wooden doors. "It's bigger than our barn," he whispered. "Yes, it is." Evelyn's voice trembled slightly, but she squared her shoulders. The blisters on her hands from yesterday's wagon journey stung, reminding her of how far they'd come. There was no turning back now. Inside, the courthouse hallway echoed with footsteps and murmured conversations. Men in dark suits hurried past, carrying leather portfolios and important-looking papers. The air smelled of wood polish and dust, with undertones of tobacco smoke that clung to the walls. A clerk directed them to courtroom 3, his eyebrows rising slightly at Evelyn's size but saying nothing. She was used to such looks. Today, she had bigger concerns than strangers' judgment. The courtroom doors creaked as they entered. Wooden benches stretched in neat rows already half filled with spectators. At the front, a heavy wooden rail separated the gallery from the judge's raised platform. 2 tables faced the judge's bench, one where 3 railroad lawyers sat in expensive suits, shuffling papers, and an empty one that waited for her. "This way," Evelyn whispered to William, guiding him to the empty table. Their footsteps seemed too loud on the wooden floor. She felt every eye in the room following them, heard the whispers start. They had barely settled when the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise!" The Honorable Judge Harrison presiding. Everyone stood as the judge entered, his black robes swishing. He was an older man, with steel-gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He sat, gesturing for everyone to do the same. "Case number 437, the clerk announced. Pacific and Western Railroad versus Mayfield Ranch, regarding water rights and deed validity." The lead railroad lawyer rose smoothly, his voice practiced and confident. Your Honor, we contend that Miss Mayfield's claim to the water rights is invalid. The creek in question runs through land that rightfully belongs to the railroad under the Land Grant Act of 1862. Evelyn's hands trembled as she unwrapped her father's documents. William pressed close to her side, his presence giving her strength. The lawyer continued, presenting maps and surveys that seemed designed to confuse. He spoke of easements and prior claims, his words spinning a web of legal complexity that made Evelyn's head swim. When he finished, the judge turned to Evelyn. "Miss Mayfield, your response?" Standing took all her courage. The wooden floor creaked beneath her weight as she rose, but she lifted her chin and spoke clearly, just as her father had taught her. "Your Honor, I have here the original deed to our ranch, signed and notarized 23 years ago." She lifted the papers carefully. "It clearly shows the creek running through our property, with full water rights granted to my father and his heirs." The judge nodded. "Please approach and present your documents." Evelyn walked forward, conscious of every step. As she handed over the papers, she pulled out another document, a folded piece of paper that had been secretly delivered to her room that morning. "I also have written testimony from Mr. Boone Thatcher, currently held in jail on false charges. It reveals evidence of corruption involving Deputy Crane and certain railroad representatives." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The railroad lawyers shifted uncomfortably. The judge examined both documents carefully, his expression giving nothing away. The railroad's lead lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, we object to any testimony from Thatcher. He's a known violent man with a criminal record." "Objection noted," the judge said dryly, "but I will review all evidence presented." Evelyn felt strength flowing into her voice. "Boone Thatcher may have a past, Your Honor, but he's an honest man. His testimony details meetings between Deputy Crane and railroad agents planning to force me off my land through false arrests and legal trickery." The courtroom stirred again. William squeezed her hand, his face proud. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, surprising herself with her boldness, "I stand before you not just for myself, but for my nephew William, and for my father's memory. This land isn't just property to us. It's our home, our livelihood, and our heritage." She drew herself up to her full height, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I will not be bullied off my land by false charges and fancy lawyers. My father taught me that truth and right will prevail, and I believe that still." Silence fell across the courtroom. Even the railroad lawyers seemed taken aback by her fierce dignity. The judge studied her over his spectacles, then turned to examine the documents again. After what seemed like hours, he looked up. "This case requires careful consideration of all evidence presented. I will review these documents thoroughly and render my decision tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. He struck his gavel. "Court is in recess." The tension in the room broke like a thunderclap. People began talking at once, rising from their seats. The railroad lawyers huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Evelyn's legs felt weak as she gathered their things. William helped her, his small hand steady and sure. "You were brave as a lion, Auntie," he whispered. Outside, the winter afternoon was fading into dusk. Evelyn's mind spun with worry about where they would sleep, but a kind-faced woman approached them on the courthouse steps. "I'm Martha Tanner," she said warmly. "I run the boarding house just down the street. I heard your testimony, and I'd be honored to offer you and your nephew a room for the night." Tears of gratitude pricked Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Tanner. We'd be much obliged." The boarding house was a neat two-story building with lace curtains and the smell of fresh bread. Mrs. Tanner showed them to a small but clean room with a sturdy bed and a trundle beneath it for William. After a simple supper of beef stew and cornbread, Evelyn and William retired to their room. The events of the day seemed to crash over her all at once, leaving her exhausted. William crawled into bed beside her instead of using the trundle, curling against her side like he had since he was tiny. Through the window, they could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Uncle Boone will come home," William whispered, his voice heavy with sleep but full of certainty. Evelyn pulled him close, her heart swelling with love for this precious child who never doubted, who saw the world with such clear eyes. "Yes," she whispered back. "I believe he will." Outside their window, the town settled into its nighttime rhythm. Lamps were lit in windows, doors locked, and prayers said. Somewhere in the jail, Boone waited for justice. In offices and homes, people discussed the day's events, speaking of the large woman who had stood so bravely in court. Evelyn lay awake long after William's breathing deepened into sleep. Her mind turned over every detail of the day, every word spoken in that imposing courtroom. She had done all she could. Now it was in God's hands, and tomorrow would bring his answer. The night grew deeper, stars wheeling slowly overhead. In the strange bed, in the unfamiliar room, Evelyn held her nephew close and waited for dawn, her heart both anxious and strong with hope. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse's tall windows, casting long shadows across the packed benches. Evelyn sat with William beside her, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop their trembling. The familiar sense of wood polish and leather filled the air, mixing with the nervous energy of the waiting crowd. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Everyone stood as Judge Harrison entered, his black robes rustling. He took his seat behind the massive oak bench, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles as he settled the papers before him. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room. Evelyn lowered herself carefully onto the wooden bench, drawing William close. The railroad lawyers sat at their table, backs straight and faces confident. They had spent the morning in whispered conversations, shooting dark glances her way. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Having reviewed all evidence presented in the matter of Pacific and Western Railroad versus Mayfield Ranch, I am prepared to render my verdict." The silence deepened. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. William's small hand found hers and squeezed. "First," the judge continued, "regarding the validity of the Mayfield deed." He lifted the weathered document Evelyn had presented. This deed, properly signed and notarized 23 years ago, clearly establishes ownership of the land in question, including all water rights to Creek's Crossing. The court finds this deed to be legally binding and wholly valid. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lead railroad lawyer half rose from his chair, but the judge's stern glance made him sink back down. Second, concerning the allegations of fraud and misconduct. Judge Harrison's voice hardened. The written testimony provided by Mr. Boone Thatcher, combined with supporting documentation, reveals a disturbing pattern of corruption. Deputy Silas Crane is hereby removed from his position, pending criminal investigation. Gasps echoed off the high ceiling. In the back of the courtroom, Deputy Crane's face turned scarlet with rage. Furthermore, the judge declared, all charges against Boone Thatcher are dismissed as fraudulent. He is to be released immediately. Tears sprang to Evelyn's eyes, blurring her vision. William bounced in his seat, grinning from ear to ear. Finally, Judge Harrison concluded, this court orders the Pacific and Western Railroad to cease all attempts to seize or contest the Mayfield property. The matter is closed. He struck his gavel with finality. Court is adjourned. The room erupted in noise. The railroad lawyers gathered their papers with angry movements, while townspeople began talking all at once. But Evelyn barely noticed any of it. She sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the surge of relief and gratitude. "We won, Auntie," William cried, throwing his arms around her substantial middle. "We really won." Before she could respond, the courtroom doors swung open. Boone Thatcher strode in, unshackled and free. His dark eyes found Evelyn immediately, and the look in them made her heart skip. She rose, no longer caring what anyone thought. William darted ahead as she moved down the aisle, her steps quickening despite her size. Then she was in Boone's arms, his strong embrace surrounding her, and she didn't try to hide her tears. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You saved us all." William wedged himself between them, and Boone lifted the boy up with one arm while keeping the other around Evelyn. The three of them stood there, holding each other, as the courtroom slowly emptied around them. Some of the townsfolk paused as they passed, offering quiet words of congratulation or shamefaced nods. Others watched from a distance, their expressions thoughtful, as if seeing Evelyn in a new light. "Miss Mayfield," Judge Harrison's voice made them turn. He had descended from the bench and approached with a gentle smile. "Your father would be proud of the courage you showed in my courtroom. It's not often I see such dignity in the face of intimidation." "Thank you, Your Honor," Evelyn replied softly. "My father taught me that truth would prevail if we stood firm in faith." The judge nodded. "He was right." He tipped his head to Boone. "And you, sir, chose a fine woman to stand beside. I trust you'll make it official soon?" "Yes, sir," Boone answered, his arm tightening around Evelyn. "Just as soon as the preacher's free." They made their way out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. On the steps, several townspeople approached them, including Martha Tanner from the boarding house. "I've packed you some food for the journey home," she said, pressing a basket into Evelyn's hands. "And I hope you'll consider me a friend from now on." Others added their voices, some apologizing for past unkindness, others offering congratulations on the engagement. Even those who had once mocked now seemed to see something different when they looked at Evelyn, not just her size but her strength and grace. The railroad men watched from across the street, their faces dark with thwarted plans, but they didn't dare approach. Boone's presence and the judge's ruling formed a shield that even they couldn't penetrate. The ride home was filled with William's excited chatter as he recalled every moment of the trial. Boone drove the wagon, while Evelyn sat beside him, drinking in the familiar sights of their land. The afternoon sun painted the winter-brown grass gold, and the creek sparkled where it wound through their property, now safe and secured. As they crested the final hill, the ranch spread out before them. The weathered barn stood solid against the sky. Smoke curled from the chimney where Mrs. Potter, their neighbor, had kept the fire going, and the cattle lowed in welcome from their pasture. "Home," William sighed happily. Boone helped Evelyn down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure. "Your father once told me this ranch would only thrive with someone strong enough to love it properly," he said. "He meant you, Evelyn." "He always knew your strength." Evelyn blushed, but held his gaze. "There's different kinds of strength," she replied. "Takes one kind to hold on to land and another to hold on to hope. Reckon we both had what the other needed." William had already run ahead to the house, and they could hear him chattering to Mrs. Potter through the open door. The smell of fresh bread wafted out to greet them. "Might be just a simple supper tonight," Evelyn said as they walked toward the house. "Been too busy fighting railroad men to do much cooking." Boone's laugh was rich and warm. "Simple suits me fine. It's who shares it that matters." Inside, Mrs. Potter had indeed kept things running smoothly. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, with soup simmering on the stove and fresh bread cooling on the rack. William was already setting the table, chattering about the trial to Mrs. Potter's enthusiastic audience. After Mrs. Potter left for home, the three of them sat down to their simple supper. Evelyn served up bowls of soup and sliced the warm bread, her movements sure and comfortable in her own kitchen again. Boone's eyes followed her with quiet appreciation, while William bounced in his chair, still too excited to sit still. The kitchen filled with talk and laughter as William recounted the trial yet again, complete with dramatic gestures. Boone added his own story of the sympathetic jailer who had helped smuggle out his testimony. Evelyn mostly listened, her heart too full for many words. The familiar sounds of home surrounded them, the crackle of the stove fire, the ticking of the clock on the mantel, the evening wind in the eaves. Through the window, they could see the sun setting behind their barn, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was just a simple supper in a ranch kitchen, but to Evelyn, it felt like a feast. They were home. They were together, and they were free to build their future. Looking around the table at Boone's steady presence and William's shining face, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Here was everything she'd never dared to hope for: love, family, and the land her father had entrusted to her care. The strength to protect it had been within her all along, just waiting for the right moment to shine forth. As the evening settled around them, their laughter continued to fill the kitchen, warming the room even more surely than the stove's heat. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was for celebrating the simple joy of being home together. The days following their courthouse victory brought a gentle rhythm to the Mayfield ranch. Morning frost sparkled on fence posts as Boone showed William how to test each rail for weakness. The boy's small hands wrapped around the hammer eagerly, though his strikes sometimes went wild. "Easy there," Boone guided William's arm. "Let the hammer do the work." His patient instruction made Evelyn smile as she watched from the kitchen window, her hands deep in bread dough. The garden, though dormant for winter, still needed tending. Evelyn spread straw over the sleeping earth while Boone hauled water from the creek. Their movements fell into an easy dance, each anticipating the other's needs without words. In town, the whispers hadn't completely died, but they'd changed tone. Mrs. Henderson at the general store now held Evelyn's gaze when counting out change. The banker tipped his hat with genuine respect. Even the church ladies who had once turned away now made space in their circle. One evening, after William had drifted off to sleep upstairs, Evelyn and Boone sat before the crackling hearth. The firelight caught the scars on his weathered hands as he stared into the flames. "There's blood on these hands," he said quietly. "Men I've hurt. Some I've killed." His voice roughened. "Sometimes I wake fearful that darkness will follow me here, to you and William." Evelyn's heart ached at his confession. She reached across the space between their chairs and took his calloused hand in her soft one. "The Lord's mercy is bigger than any darkness," she said. "He brought you here for a reason. To a woman strong enough to bear my burdens?" Boone's eyes glistened. "To a family waiting to love you," she corrected gently. Boone lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her breath catch. The tender gesture spoke volumes more than words could say. Outside, snow began falling, each flake catching the lamplight through the window. The quiet blanketed the valley like grace, muffling all sound except their breathing and the pop of settling logs in the fire. In that moment, Evelyn felt her heart expand with both peace and a yearning she'd never dared acknowledge before. The first wildflowers pushed through melting snow as spring crept into Silver Crossing. Evelyn's acceptance of Boone's marriage proposal set the town abuzz with chatter. Some still shook their heads in disbelief, but others smiled warmly when the couple passed by. In the church basement, needles flashed in lamplight as women gathered to sew Evelyn's wedding gown. Mrs. Henderson, who had donated the cream-colored fabric, guided the careful stitching. "A bride should feel like an angel," she declared, measuring the bodice with gentle hands. Evelyn blinked back tears at such unexpected kindness. William took his role as Bible-bearer with utmost seriousness. Up and down the ranch house hallway he practiced, chin held high, carrying their family Bible with reverent steps. "Like this, Auntie?" he would ask, and Evelyn's heart swelled with pride. Boone threw himself into preparations with quiet determination. And the steady rhythm of his hammer rang across the yard as he replaced worn shingles on the ranch house roof. "Want it tight against the spring rains," he explained, though Evelyn knew he was building more than just shelter. He was creating a home worthy of their future. The evening before the wedding, Evelyn sat alone in her bedroom. Lamplight cast a soft glow as she studied her reflection in the mirror. Her fingers traced the curves of her face, the fullness of her form that had drawn so much mockery. But tonight, something different shone in her eyes. She saw what Boone saw, not a woman to be ridiculed, but one to be cherished. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks, "for showing me I am worthy of love." In the barn, Boone carefully stropped his razor against leather, preparing to shave for tomorrow's ceremony. His weathered hands, usually so sure, with rope and reins, moved with extra care. He would stand beside Evelyn clean-shaven and proud, honoring her courage and faith in him. Upstairs in the ranch house, William slept peacefully, his Bible-carrying suit laid out for morning. His dreams were filled with cake and celebration of Boone becoming truly family, of tomorrow's joy bringing them all together at last. The little church glowed like heaven itself that evening, with dozens of oil lamps casting warm light through its windows. Townsfolk filled every pew, their faces a mix of curiosity and anticipation. The scent of spring flowers decorated every corner, their sweetness mixing with the familiar smell of worn hymnals and wooden benches. When the door creaked open, William stepped through first, proudly bearing the family Bible. Behind him came Evelyn, and a collective gasp rose from the congregation. Her cream-colored gown, lovingly sewn by the town's women, draped her large frame with dignity, but it was her face that captured everyone's attention. She fairly glowed with joy, her eyes bright with unshed tears. At the altar, Boone stood tall in his best black coat, freshly shaved for the occasion. His scarred face, usually so stern, had softened with pride as he watched his bride approach. The old mountain man's hands trembled slightly as Evelyn drew near, betraying the depth of his emotion. Preacher Thompson's voice filled the small church with warmth. "We gather today to witness God's infinite mercy and the power of true love," he began. "For in his wisdom, he brings healing to the wounded, hope to the lonely, and family to those who walk alone." When the time came for vows, Evelyn's voice quivered with joy. "I promise to love you, Boone Thatcher, with all that I am. To stand beside you in faith and trust come storm or sunshine." Boone's deep voice rang clear and strong through the church. "I have found the only woman who could tame my wild heart," he declared, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "I pledge my life, my protection, and my eternal devotion to you." Tears flowed freely among the congregation. Even those who had once mocked Evelyn found themselves wiping their eyes, moved by the pure love before them. After the ceremony, celebration spilled into the churchyard. Lanterns swung from tree branches as fiddle music filled the air. Tables groaned under the weight of shared dishes, fresh bread, roasted chicken, and pies of every description. When the dancing began, Evelyn hesitated, self-conscious of her size. But Boone drew her into his arms with tender confidence. Soon she was moving freely to the music, her face flushed with happiness as they twirled beneath the stars. William darted between the dancers with other children, their laughter adding to the joyful chaos. As evening deepened, Boone helped Evelyn into their waiting wagon. William hugged them both before running to stay with Mrs. Henderson for the night. The newlyweds set off toward home, the spring stars twinkling overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Evelyn nestled against Boone's shoulder, finally and completely at peace. From the church steps, the townsfolk waved farewell, their hearts touched by witness to love's power to transform two lonely souls into one family. The ranch house welcomed them home, its familiar warmth embracing them like an old friend. Lamplight spilled through the windows, and the hearth fire crackled merrily in the kitchen, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Evelyn moved with practiced grace, setting out their wedding supper on the sturdy oak table. The aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air as Boone took up the carving knife, his movements precise and careful. William could hardly keep still in his chair, his words tumbling out in excited bursts. "Did you see how many people came?" he asked, bouncing in his seat. "And the way everyone clapped when you kissed Uncle Boone." Evelyn's cheeks flushed pink as she passed the potatoes, her wedding ring catching the firelight. The simple meal tasted sweeter than any feast, seasoned with joy and shared glances between the newlyweds. After the dishes were cleared, Evelyn and Boone stepped out onto the porch. The valley stretched before them, bathed in silver moonlight that turned the grass to rippling silk. Boone's arms settled around her shoulders, strong and sure. "Your strength," he whispered against her hair. "It's given me a peace I never thought to find." Evelyn leaned into his embrace. "No man ever dared to love me," she murmured. "But God knew better. He sent me the right one." "Look!" William called from the doorway. He held up the wooden horse Boone had whittled during those first days of courtship, its smooth lines testament to patient care. The sight brought smiles to all their faces. Their laughter rang out across the moonlit yard, pure and unrestrained. It was the sound of a family whole and complete at last, their hearts bound together by love, faith, and the courage to stand unashamed. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.